Progress. Good. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to all of you as you join the program. I'm Charles Shapiro, the President Emeritus of the World Affairs Council of Atlanta, and welcome to another installment in the Council's Beyond the Border series. Today's topic is Preventing the Unthinkable, India and Pakistan's nuclear, like Jimmy Carter can't say it, nuclear standoff. Our guest expert is Dr. Aparna Pandey from the Hudson Institute. I want to give a special welcome to Asma Farid, who's a member of the board of directors of both the World Affairs Council of Atlanta and the World Affairs Council of Connecticut. And I also want to give a special welcome to former council vice president and executive director and dear friend Cedric Sussman. I'm going to apologize in advance if there are any technical difficulties. I am in a hotel room, and so using hotel Wi-Fi, and sometimes there are issues with that. After I talk to Dr. Pandey for a few minutes, I'm going to ask her questions from the audience. Please use the Q&A function to submit questions. And for those of you who aren't familiar with it, if you take your cursor down to the bottom of the Zoom screen, move it around, the Q&A will pop up, and please use that. I will appreciate that. World Affairs Council President Ricky Bevington had a conflict that came up at the last minute, and so she's not on, and I have the honor of introducing Dr. Pandey. Dr. Aparna Pandey is a research fellow at the Hudson Institute. She wrote her PhD dissertation on Pakistan's foreign policy. Her major field of interest is South Asia, with a special focus on India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, foreign policy and security. She is a 1993 graduate of Delhi University. Dr. Pandey holds a Master of Arts in History from St. Stephen's College at Delhi and a Master of Philosophy in International Relations from Jawaharlal Nehru University. She received her doctorate in political science from Boston University in 2010. Welcome, Dr. Pandey.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure having you here. Let me start off with an easy question, and that is, India and Pakistan have been, I guess enemy is the right word, since partition in 1947. There were major wars. The last three clashes were in 1999, 2001, 2019. What triggered the events that started in April of this year?
Thank you, Charles. Thanks for inviting me. I won't call India and Pakistan enemies. I would call them neighboring countries who have had a conflict-ridden relationship since the violent partition in 47. They have fought 4 wars, actually, 3 of which were over Kashmir, the last in 1999. Since then, they have almost gone to war, but not. 2001, 2008, 2016, and 2019, and now 2025. What happened recently is something that has happened since the 2 countries turned nuclear in 1998. Every few years, there's a terror attack inside India, almost always tied to a Pakistan-based terror group. There's an escalation in tensions. In recent years, there has been not just saber-rattling, but strikes by both countries. And the global community comes in to de-escalate tensions between nuclear-armed neighbors. There's quiet and peace for a few years, and then another terror attack results in a return to this cycle. This latest round of skirmishes was triggered by a terror attack in Pahalgam inside Indian Kashmir, where terrorists killed 26 civilians after targeting them based on their religion. In response, India launched what it called punitive strikes, targeting 9 terror camps inside Pakistan. Pakistan retaliated by targeting Indian military camps, and India responded. And this continued for around 3 days till the ceasefire.
So we understand the terror groups are based in Pakistan, but are they controlled by Pakistan? What's the connection between the Pakistani military, Pakistani government, and these terror groups?
Sure. So Pakistan's foreign and security policy has long been framed by the military intelligence establishment. And at the core of that lies the view of India as an existential threat. Basically, the notion that India wants to undo partition and the creation of Pakistan. There's thus a long history of the Pakistani military intelligence, or the deep state, if you can call it, supporting terror groups. Goes back to 1947, when actually a tribal Lashkar or a tribal group was backed by the Pakistani army, tried to force the Maharaja of Kashmir to join Pakistan. And that started the first war between the two countries. Over the decades, an inability to have conventional military parity with India has meant that the Pakistani military has chosen the strategy of what scholars call sub-conventional warfare, or use of terror proxies under a nuclear umbrella as its strategy vis-a-vis India. I'm sure you recall, after the end of the anti-Soviet Afghan jihad in Afghanistan, there were several Mujahideen groups and fighters who were free. So most of those were directed by the Pakistani intelligence to focus on India and on Kashmir. At that time, India had an indigenous insurgency which had just erupted. And so these groups took advantage of that. And so over the last few decades, there has been alphabet soup of Pakistan-based terror groups, many of which are supported by the Pakistani-based military intelligence, like Lashkar-e-Taiba, which was responsible for the 2008 Mumbai terror attack, Jaish-e-Mohammed, responsible for the 2001 Indian Parliament attack, Hizbul Mujahideen, and others. They changed their names, that their terror camps, their recruiting, their financing continues intact, despite international pressure, even American pressure, despite being on the UN Financial Action Task Force grey list several times. The Pakistani deep state has been reluctant to stop support or to wipe out these terror groups completely, because they see it as the only way that they can put pressure on India.
Do they direct it? I mean, do they say, on April 22nd, we want you to do such and such in Kashmir?
No, it doesn't really happen that way. I'll give you an example. The 2008 Mumbai terror attacks, the terrorists who were responsible for it. There was, I mean, if you watched, I believe it was the HBO documentary with Fareed Zakaria, there were intercepts of actual phone conversations between handlers sitting inside Pakistan and the terrorists who were inside the Taj Hotel in Bombay, telling them what to do. Most of those 10 people were trained by some elements of the Pakistani military intelligence. They didn't ask them to go on November 26th, 2008 to attack inside India. But they they were trained to go and do something. What time and when is sometimes chosen by those terror groups. Again, this time round, 22nd April was when the attack took place in Pahalgam. On April 16th, around a week ago, before the attack, Pakistan's army chief, who's just recently, about an hour ago, been made field marshal,
right,
Asim Munir, gave a public speech in which he referred to India, Pakistan in the context of the two-nation theory, Hindus and Muslims being eternal enemies, and it being a religious conflict with India, which will last forever. And he talked about support for Kashmir. So that, for many in India, was like a green signal that after basically 6 years of quiet between India and Pakistan, terror groups were basically told, you can once again start creating problems inside India.
If you were a Pakistani academic who had studied and gotten your PhD at Boston University, would your analysis be different?
Actually, no. And the reason is that my PhD advisor is a Pakistani. He's written several books on Pakistan. His name is Hussain Haqqani. He's written several books, and he is the person I learned about Pakistan, Pakistani deep state, the Pakistani military intelligence. And so Pakistani analysts also know that the Pakistani military has used these groups, and they've used it for domestic, to target civilian politicians. They've used it, there are Pakistan groups which have targeted Shias. the Sunni major, and those are again supported by the Pakistani military intelligence to target the Shias or to target Ahmadis. There are also those who the Pakistani military has supported the Afghan Taliban inside Afghanistan. So it's both neighbors. There are also, Iran complains about groups which the Pakistani military intelligence supports inside Iran. So it's every neighbor of Pakistan against whom terror proxies have been deployed by the Pakistani state. So it's not just India.
The in their domestic media, both India and Pakistan claim victory in this 3-day conflict, 4-day conflict in May. What's your assessment? Who won? Who lost? And I even saw something today that says, actually it was the Chinese defense industry that's the big winner from this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So there's some truth in that. I mean, I would say that as of now, we need to wait for what everybody calls a fog of war to calm down before we know more. It's a little too soon to know who has won until some weeks and maybe months or even years from now. But suffice it to say that both sides believe they won, and the public in both countries believes the same. So each side has claimed to down jets of the other country. Pakistan claims it has downed three or five Indian jets, and the Indian side claims it has downed Pakistani fighter jets. Each side claims it has caused destruction to the other's military bases. And they also believe that their air defense missile systems downed missiles and drones. India's conventional military capability is several times Pakistan's, and that was visible in this conflict. As you know, Pakistan is a narrow width, so it doesn't have much of strategic depth. And that means that India could strike every military base inside Pakistan without even crossing the international boundary line. Pakistan's close military and security ties with China were clearly visible in this conflict. And, drawing on what you said, I would argue the real country which has benefited from this skirmish was China. That's because China's goal has long been to strategically encircle India and keep it tied down to South Asia. And Pakistan helps with that Chinese strategy.
The United States suddenly claimed responsibility for the ceasefire. Indian media said, they were already talking to each other and a ceasefire was in the works when the U.S. got involved. Is that correct? I mean, is it the U.S. that was the midwife to the ceasefire?
So, let me start by saying that the U.S. has been involved and has played a role in several of of India-Pakistan crises going back, to 48 when the United Nations Security Council, but 65, 71, 99, and the skirmishes. However, India and Pakistan have widely divergent views on third-party or international mediation on any issue or dispute. And India has never accepted or sought any third party, country, or institution to mediate in any bilateral dispute, including with Pakistan or over Kashmir. And so, from India's point of view, as I believe today, India's top diplomat said in a press briefing that things had already started to settle down, and the two DGMOs had spoken before the U.S.
Sorry, what does DGMO mean?
The Director General Military Operations, the two military had already spoken on a hotline and agreed to the ceasefire before the Americans played a role. From India's point of view, India and Pakistan will resolve their disputes. Pakistan's view has been different. Pakistan has always sought and championed third-party mediation. And so what I would say is that India is open to American pressure on Pakistan that would convince Pakistan to back off from supporting terror or de-escalate during any conflict. However, India is averse to any public American or public international pressure asking India to de-escalate. Private conversations are a very different thing.
Okay. On the military side, and you alluded to this earlier, I mean, there was an actual aerial dogfight with Pakistan deploying 40 fighter jets and an AWACS aircraft, airborne air traffic control, military control aircraft India apparently deployed up to 80 aircraft. Both sides used long-range missiles. Uh, Pakistan claims it shot down
Mhm.
5 Indian jets, and their TV is showing video of engines and parts of crashed planes. Um, what did we learn about fighters, drones, air defense systems, jets, the quality of each nation's aircraft and its pilots, and the cyber attacks that both sides used?
So this was the first drone war between the two countries. It largely Chinese and Turkish drones on the Pakistani side, and Indian and Israeli drones on the Indians. Was for 2 nights, drones were sent. Even the third night, I think once the ceasefire was announced, initially some drones were still visible on both sides.
Mhm.
As I'm sure you're aware, India's military equipment is a mixed bag. It's a mix of Soviet, Russian, American, Israeli, and French. And we saw that in the jets India used, whether it was the Sukhois, the MiGs, which are Russian and Soviet, the Mirage and Rafale, which are French, the S-400, which is a Russian anti-ballistic missile system that India deployed to protect. And also India used the Indian Soviet jointly manufactured BrahMos, which is a supersonic cruise missile. So these were from the Indian side. India also deployed its indigenous, actually, air defense control and reporting system. The Pakistani side is military equipment is primarily American or Chinese, and it used primarily Chinese equipment this time. So the JFJ and J-10 fighter jets, the PL-15, air-to-air missiles. And Pakistan also used, and China helped it with this, the HQ-9's, surface-to-air missile system to protect Pakistani military bases from Indian jets and Indian missiles. So in some ways, the earlier question which you had mentioned, Chinese defense military, it was primarily Chinese military equipment on one side and Russian, French, and Indian on the other. That's what we saw. We saw things we already knew, which is which country depends on what military equipment, how does it fit into that country's strategic calculus and other calculus, and that the Pakistani military equipment is now less American and more Chinese in nature.
So whose equipment worked best? I mean, the Chinese equipment worked, the Russian equipment is out of date.
So, so
How would you characterize that?
So the Chinese equipment worked very well. And I think the Chinese will use that to showcase to other countries around the world that, you don't need French or Russian or American. You can buy our equipment, which is cheaper. On the Indian side, the S-400 worked very well, which is a defense system which India purchased a few years ago, despite American objections in 2018, and that really helped. And so did India's own air defense system. On the other hand, India will need to find a better way. India needs to modernize its military because most of its fighter jets are very old. So those Sukhois and MiGs date back, to the 80s, and even the Mirage jets of the French are 80s and 90s. Only the Rafales are the brand new, and so it needs to modernize its military, its conventional military, because the last two skirmishes with Pakistan have been air on air. It's the Indian Air Force and the Pakistani Air Force which have been going toe to toe. And so India needs to modernize its military at a faster pace than it has been doing over the last few decades. That is what was demonstrated. The Pakistani side had newer equipment anyway to start with because they had American F-16s and over the decades, and now has Chinese equipment.
Let's turn to the nuclear side because that's what most concerns. I mean, obviously, I'm concerned about a conventional war, but a nuclear war impacts everyone. Um, in December, former U.S. Senator Sam Nunn, who is one of the foremost experts on nuclear issues, said that what concerns him most, the potential conflict that concerns him most, keeps him up at night, is Pakistan and India. Is he right? I mean, should we all, because if you read the U.S. media, if you read the British media, there's some of that, but it doesn't have that urgency that Sam Nunn is talking about. Should we be more concerned?
So I would start by pointing out both countries are responsible nuclear powers.
And what do you mean by responsible?
So I'll explain. In 1988, about 10 years before they actually sort of publicly tested their nuclear weapons, they signed a non-attack agreement, or India-Pakistan agreement on prohibition of attack against nuclear installations and facilities. And every January 1st, since then, they exchange a list of such facilities. So they have a list of each other's, updated list of each other's facilities exchanged every January, and that has continued irrespective of tensions, irrespective of any lowering of diplomatic relations, skirmishes, what. Second, for the last 27 years, in some ways, nuclear weapons have prevented an all-out war. Neither country wants all-out war. And even in this recent conflict, let us remember, each side made it a point to emphasize that they had no desire to escalate the conflict. They were simply, first Indian strike was that we are just doing a punitive strike. We are not going to strike any Pakistani military bases. It is purely the terror camps that we are striking. Even after that, each side insisted they were just responding. They were not going to escalate it. Now, will that at some stage change because of miscalculation or human action and result in breaking of the taboo in South Asia? I don't know that right now. But I would emphasize that India does have a no first use doctrine, except as a second strike. So India will never use nuclear weapons in the first, against another country. Now, however, they do have nuclear material. Both countries have the same number of nuclear warheads. I believe India has 172, in Pakistan has 170. They are stored warheads, intermediate range, medium range, short range, and free fall bombs.
So
But
they've
India,
been miniaturized so they can be
yes,
weaponized. They fit in
yes,
missiles, they fit in
yes,
bombs.
yes. India also has sea-based, and Pakistan does not. So India has that, trident. But Pakistan has tactical or battlefield nukes. India does not. Because for India, it's a second strike. It's not a first strike. So it's not going to go in for tactical nukes. India has more fissile material than Pakistan does, but India has signed the fissile material cutoff treaty. So it's not going to keep building more material. Pakistan has not. India has also signed the civil nuclear deal with the United States in 2008. And under that, India's civilian nuclear reactors are under IAEA, watch. Pakistan has not signed any such agreement, so its reactors are not under any international oversight.
How close in this or any of the previous conflicts have the two nations come to deploying nuclear weapons?
So,
do we have first of all, do we have a way of, does the outside world have a way of knowing, can satellites see things being taken out of caves?
So the last time that the Americans believed that Pakistan may be moving towards deploying was in 1999, the Kargil conflict. As the conflict progressed and the Indian military was starting to regain the posts. So the Kargil conflict started because every winter, Indian and Pakistani troops used to come down from the hilltops and leave their posts vacant. In 1999, in spring, before spring started, the Pakistani military took over the Indian posts. And that's when the conflict started. So at that time, as the conflict progressed, the American intelligence saw some movement. And so that led then President Bill Clinton to call on Pakistani Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif, and they actually met in person on July 4th in DC, because Prime Minister Sharif came all the way. And President Clinton warned. He said that we can see movement, that you're moving you may be moving your nuclear warheads, and we want you to stop that. So that was one of the times when the Americans knew, and this is out in public because of books which have been written about that conflict and by people who worked with President Clinton, like Mr. Rydell, Bruce Rydell. He wrote an entire piece on it. But that was the last time that this happened. 2001, 2002 was both moved their conventional military to the border. 2008, India did not respond, and there was international pressure on Pakistan to act against the terror groups. 2016, India conducted, India special forces crossed the border to, sort of to attack a terror camp. And the last two times, it's just been Air Force. But um, since 1999, there has been no, as of now, there has been no reporting that either side was, that the Pakistani side, because the Indian side would never do it, as it will always be a second strike. Only if Pakistan struck would India ever move to its nuclear warheads, because India has a no first use doctrine. There was no, but there was concern this time round that in one of the final Indian strikes on a Pakistani airbase, the Noor Khan Air Base, which housed Nuclear Command Authority of Pakistan, that the Pakistani military was concerned that India may actually strike, it was getting too close to comfort for the Pakistani military, the extent to which India was able to strike its air bases. And so there was concern among the Americans that if Pakistan's military gets too concerned, they may decide to deploy or use a tactical nuke or a nuclear warhead.
Should we be concerned? I mean, Sam Nunn was, by the way, that terrorists could gain control, not intentionally, but without the knowledge of either the Pakistani or the Indian governments, that terrorists could somehow gain control of a nuclear weapon. Is that how realistic is that? How concerned are you about that?
So despite what Hollywood or Bollywood may believe, I'm not one of those who fears that terrorists will gain access to Indian or Pakistani nuclear weapons. Both countries protect their nuclear facilities, civilian and military. For Pakistan's army, its nuclear weapons are its crown jewels. They are part of its biggest deterrence, protection against India. But the military will protect them. The only way terrorists would get a hold of Pakistan's nuclear weapons would be if an Islamist ideologue became the head of Pakistan's army and then chose to allow terrorists to have access to them. Nuclear proliferation has occurred inside Pakistan. I'm sure all of you have heard of the AQ Khan network, which ran for 2 decades. But that was somebody inside the nuclear military intelligence system who was involved. It wasn't an outsider getting access to something. It was an insider giving information away. For India,
selling it, no?
Yeah, selling it to to lots of countries.
North Korea. Yeah.
North Korea, Iran, Libya, others as well. For India, the nuclear weapons are a deterrence against China. There's also a civil military combined role in protecting the nuclear weapons and systems. And India, to date, has no record of any proliferation. So I don't see that. An insider in Pakistan's system doing something is different. But I don't see, though both countries will protect what are their deterrent against the country they are worried about or they see as their primary threat. For in Pakistan, it's India. For India, it's China.
Okay, first of all, let me remind the audience, please, we've got a few questions, but please send in your questions. I hope you've got loads of them. Aparna, what are the long-term trends here? I mean, that's what you write your books about. What are the long-term trends? I mean, the Indian economy is growing much more quickly than the Pakistani economy. So, if one were Pakistani, you have to see that trend as something that doesn't bode well for Pakistan. Pakistan's increasingly close with China and has, I'm not sure if alliance is the right word, but alliance adjacent relationship with China. the world seems to be okay not getting involved in the dispute on Kashmir. I mean, maybe we should be, maybe we shouldn't be, but at least to date, we have not been. Um, all of this from afar certainly looks like a volatile mix over the long term. So here's my question, a long series of questions. Is Senator Nunn right to be concerned about the possibility of nuclear war between Pakistan and India in such a volatile situation over the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? You tell me.
So let me start by saying there is there is a long-term trend. That trend started in the 1990s. It continues to this day, and it will moving forward. India's population is 6 times Pakistan's. India's GDP is currently 10 times Pakistan. India's defense budget is 10 times Pakistan. India is the fastest growing emerging economy. Almost every country around the world is wooing India, and they want closer ties with India in every area, even China. China is one of India's top trading partners. Uh, Pakistan's economy has had structural challenges going back decades, and the country has gone to the IMF 24 times since 1958, and currently they are in their next bailout loan, which is going. So in many ways, the two countries are further apart today than they were in 47, in 65, in 71, or even in 1999. And they are moving further and further away. But at the end of the day, I do believe you cannot ignore your neighbor, especially one that is focused or obsessed with you the way Pakistan has been with India over the last few decades. And if India wants to be a global power, not just a regional one, it needs to find a way to have a non-hostile working relationship with its largest immediate neighbor, which is Pakistan. How that will happen, I'm happy to talk about in the Q&A or later. The global community gave up on resolving Kashmir dispute long time ago. The last time the UN Security Council passed a resolution on Kashmir was 1957.
Wow.
When Pakistan was an American ally and India was non-aligned. Today, the only country that references Kashmir at the UN General Assembly is Pakistan. From 1947 to 2015, Indian and Pakistani heads of state met 45 times to resolve the disputes, issues, talks about everything from water to Kashmir, but they were unable to do so. Now, I think the best way to resolve the dispute, the Kashmir dispute, would be for both countries to freeze the issue, have normal relations like neighbors do, and at some stage in the distant future, come back to Kashmir. For that to happen, actually, both sides would need to step back. Pakistan would need to eliminate the terror infrastructure inside its country, and India would need to resume talks with Pakistan on other issues, but also on Kashmir. As of now, I don't see either side doing that, but maybe things will change. I am sorry, I don't have a crystal ball, so I don't know if they will, when the next skirmish will happen, and if any future skirmish will result in a full-scale war. However, the only thing I can say is that is likely is the next large-scale terror attack inside India will once again see a repeat of the cycle we just saw a few weeks ago.
So you can, I mean, that one can count on.
Yeah,
That's
there is no way that it won't.
Military doctrine.
It has changed. Till 2016, India used to adopt a policy called strategic restraint, which was only use diplomatic and international pressure on Pakistan to convince Pakistan to act against the terror groups. Now, the 2008 Mumbai terror attack, a number of Americans died as well in those attacks in Mumbai,
right?
Not just Indians. And so the US did apply pressure. But to date, none of the terrorists responsible for those attacks have been, they're put in prison, they are released from prison. No action has been taken against them. So after that, India decided that since Pakistan is not going to wipe out the terror infrastructure, anytime a large terror attack takes place, India will target terror camps inside Pakistan in response.
Great. Let me ask some questions from the audience. The first one from Dr. Eubanks, I think we've answered it. You've answered it already. So I'm going to turn to Carrie Bass. Says India has prospered tremendously economically, as you say, since 1990. And that seems to be accelerating, no?
Yeah.
Why does India take the bait and risk so much loss for so little gain in response to Pakistani attacks, whether it's in Kashmir or elsewhere?
So I'd say there are two views inside India. And actually, I was just writing a piece the other day, which will hopefully come out in a few days on this issue. That at the end of the day, I'm one of those who believes that India's goal should be strategic, build your economy, modernize your military, because the main rival India has is China, and China has been doing that. And it benefits China, but it hurts India's rise if India diverts its attention towards Pakistan and any terror attack which happens. But I would say that we live in a world where for governments in any country, media, social media, and the public opinion narrative drives what countries do. And so it's been very difficult for the last, especially after the 2008 Mumbai terror attack, for any Indian government not to respond when a terror attack takes place. Because the public opinion believes that if India is, there is no way that an Indian government doesn't respond because it fears that it may lose elections the next time round for being shown as being weak and not strong on security. And that's the reason. But yes, I agree with it that India needs to focus more on building economy, building military, and not allowing diversion from its long-term goal.
Can you talk for just a second about social media certainly in the United States, social media plays a more and more prominent role. I assume the same is true both in India and Pakistan. How has that helped or exacerbated the crisis we just went through?
Yeah, so in many ways, it exacerbated the crisis. The social media, massive disinformation, on both sides. But as much as the social media, the media in both countries, and in this, the Indian media did not really, come out very well after this conflict, because the Indian state acted like a responsible status quo oriented power, but the Indian media, in many ways, this conflict, went more into fairy tale land rather than sticking with reality, and so it hurt the government's narrative. It hurt what the government was trying to project of being a responsible status quo oriented power, and it was not going to take any chances or escalate. But yes, social media does play a huge role and will continue. Fortunately or unfortunately, we will all have to live with social media, and governments will have to navigate that very fine line between trying to do things so that they they retain public support, and yet doing things that are important for their national interests.
Mark McCarthy asks, has anti-Muslim sectarian violence within India, how has that impacted Pakistan-India relations?
So, this goes back to actually 1947. So the partition was bloody, but even after partition, for the last 77 years, each country has treated the other's minority, as either people they target or they protect. So India has always, accused Pakistan of not treating its Hindu and Sikh minorities well. Pakistan has accused India of doing the same to the Muslims inside India. Now,
And
India is
just for a second, just so everybody knows, that's a huge population. What, 15% of India is
14%.
Muslim,
Yeah.
right?
So India is the second most populous Muslim population in the world after Indonesia. So it's not a Muslim majority country; it has the second largest. Now, by and large, India has done a better job with its minorities than Pakistan has done with its minorities. At the end of the day, the sort of, the Pakistani minorities have suffered a lot more. But yes, over the last decade or two, there have been rising attacks against Muslims inside India, in different parts of India. But sort of, it sort of the Supreme Court and the Indian judiciary has always come out and sort of, and stood with the minorities. So in that sense, I'd say yes, Indian democracy can do better, but at least it's a democracy, and so people know what is happening inside that country. The good, the bad, and the ugly are all there for everyone to see. Finally, in the recent clash, actually, sort of, it was very interesting that sort of, that Kashmiri Muslims came out to on the streets of the Kashmir Valley inside Indian Kashmir, protesting against the terror attacks.
Huh.
Yes, that sort of when India had its press conferences, it had an Indian Muslim woman colonel in the Indian Army as one of the sort of sort of people briefing, and sort of Indian parliamentary delegations are going to be traveling to various countries in the next 2 weeks, and each delegation has two Muslims, maybe often a Christian, a Sikh, so representing India's diversity. So yes, India has challenges, but I'd say every democracy in this world has challenges when it comes to dealing with its minorities of any form.
Darshan Dorsey asks, how do water pressures factor into the issues between India and Pakistan, and how do they lead to why don't they lead to more intense conflict?
So I presume sort of the person is asking about the Indus Waters Treaty. So India and Pakistan share the rivers of the Indus system, which are 6 rivers. And in 1960, the two countries signed under the aegis of the World Bank the Indus Waters Treaty, which has lasted till recently. And I'm saying that because after the terror attack on April 22nd, India basically suspended the Indus Waters Treaty. But to date, India has never done that. And so both countries have been sharing waters for the last, 60 odd years. Now, sort of, there have been tensions for the last, or let's say differences of opinion on the water sharing going back to the 1990s. And that has to do primarily with three factors. One, climate change. There's the Himalayan glaciers are melting. There's less ice, therefore there's less water, and so there's less water in the rivers. Pakistan is a lower riparian; it will by default get less water. Now, second, the Indus Waters Treaty lays down very clearly that the waters from 3 rivers go to Pakistan, and the waters from 3 rivers go to India. And India has never stopped water going into Pakistan, despite wars over the last few decades. But India has done a better job in building dams, though they are run-of-the-river dams and canals, than Pakistan has done. And so sort of Pakistan has not built enough canals and reservoirs to store the water which comes in on the 3 rivers which it receives. And so the Pakistani side has always had more challenges on the agrarian front and with respect to water than the Indian side has. But both, at the end of the day, are at the mercy of the Himalayas, the glaciers, and climate change. And so in the last 3 decades, there have been sort of constant sort of tension between the two countries about Pakistan believes India is not allowing enough water to come to Pakistan, and India argues that India is allowing. Now, the treaty allows international or neutral observers to come in when both sides invoke them. And the neutral observers have never called India out on anything. However, final point, India has currently suspended the Indus Waters Treaty on April 22nd. But it has not stopped any water going into Pakistan, because to stop water going into Pakistan, you would actually have to, sort of, turn off a tap. And it's not that easy to do that because you would be starving some Indian fields. And it's not as easy to turn off run-of-the-river dams. Whether India proceeds with that, I am not sure. Hopefully, conversation between the two countries will prevent any such thing from happening, because it would be unfair on any upper riparian country to deny a lower riparian country access to water.
Just so everybody knows, riparian means it has to do with river water.
Yes,
So
river water. And
it's
India
an
is
adjective we used to use much more in the United States,
Yeah,
particularly in our West. We used to talk
yeah,
about riparian rights, who has the rights to
yeah,
the water.
yeah.
Jody Kamdoon has an interesting question. She asks, since China is also a nuclear power, are there three power talks? India, Pakistan, India? I'm sorry, India, Pakistan, China on nuclear issues.
So the three do not have conversations, but yes, all three are nuclear armed, and all three, it's been a succession. China got nukes to protect itself against Soviet Union and the United States. India got nukes to protect itself against China, and Pakistan got nukes to protect itself against India. They don't have, tripartite conversations. Pak Pakistan's nuclear weapons program is actually primarily China built. Chinese built nuclear reactors, Chinese blueprints, Chinese missiles, and Chinese engineers help build Pakistan's military nuclear program. So China, Pakistan have conversations. China, Pakistan, sort of work together, but India, China may have track two conversations on, nuclear. Uh, but they don't really have a tripartite conversation on preventing any nuclear conflict. There may be some track two which is going on between India, China, and Pakistan, which may be discussing that, but not official conversations about nuclear issues.
Yuri Maruna asks, what is Pakistan's end game? Does it really hope to regain Kashmir? Is that their stated goal, or is this distraction for domestic Pakistani politics? What's really going on? And a short answer. We're coming to the end of the hour, so I'm going to force you to.
Of course. Pakistan's end game, or I would say the Pakistani military's end game, where I think it differs between the civilians and military, is that they need to contain India to South Asia and force India at some level to negotiate or hand over Kashmir. The only way to do that is either put international pressure on India to force a conversation, or push, create a conflict where the two countries almost go to war, and then by default there are conversations. The only way that the military can stay in power in Pakistan is if the Kashmir dispute remains unresolved.
Yeah.
Otherwise, there is no other. You don't need a large military.
Sue Joe asks, how do perspectives in both countries differ by generation? Do younger Indians see this differently than their grandparents? Do younger Pakistanis see this differently than their grandparents? I mean, are they like, let's get this over with and get on with building our country?
I'd say it varies not just by generation, but by which part of the country you are in. So North Indians are more likely to be concerned about Pakistan and Kashmir. The further south you go, people are less concerned or interested in Kashmir or Pakistan, or the further east you go in India. In Pakistan too, Punjab and Pakistani Kashmir, more of an interest. Sindh, Balochistan, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, very little interest. So there's a regional diversification. Also, then the rest is, interestingly, older generations of Indians and Pakistanis have fonder memories of each other because some of them met, some of them had family and relatives. The younger generations are more isolated. They've never met a Pakistani or an Indian. And so unless they have traveled abroad and they have studied abroad and they had a Pakistani or an Indian, in their class, because there is very little trade, almost none. There's more trade through UAE between India, Pakistan than direct. Very few visas, sort of very little tourism-based travel. So how are you going to meet the other?
That's fascinating. Guy Tesler asks, how would a nuclear armed Iran change the equation?
So let me answer it quickly in this way. Iran's nuclear blueprints came from Pakistan and China and North Korea. So sort of, from the Pakistani military's point of view, another nuclear Muslim country is not a problem. The Pakistani civilians may disagree on that and others, but Pakistan doesn't really have a problem. India has a good relationship with Iran, but does not want another nuclear armed country in the region. And so they both have slightly differing views on whether or not Iran should have nuclear weapons, because then India's fear is that Saudi Arabia will go nuclear, and Israel will go declared nuclear. And so there'll be a little too many nuclear weapon states in India's neighborhood, and that is not something which a status quo oriented state wants.
And that makes me very nervous. This is from the U.S., a very U.S. focused question. What does the U.S. gain from trying to mediate India-Pakistan conflict?
3
and this
points.
is from
One,
Jody Kamdun. I'm sorry.
Yeah. 3 points. One, it has long been American policy, at least for the last 3.5 decades, that India's rise is important for American interests, because India will be an economic powerhouse. India will help push back against China, and India and the US share similar views about the global security architecture. So mediating in any such conflict and preventing India it becoming either a nuclear war or a continued conflict which diverts India away from what the US would like it to focus on, makes it important for the US to be interested. Two, US is one of the few countries in the world which has leverage and really good relations with both countries. There are very few which do. And so the US can talk to both leaders and ask them to sort of de-escalate and prevent any conflict from happening, and that's important. It's good to have somebody whom both sides talk to. And third, any India-Pakistan conflict will result in China being able to not just sell more equipment, but sell more technology and appeal to the global South and other countries. Because a weaker India means a stronger China. And any India-Pakistan dispute will by default take India's attention away. So I'd say that there is American interest in it, and it should remain.
Interesting. I would suggest, and I will put this in the notes, there's a BBC, thank you to my friend Robert Abraham who pointed this out to me. There's a BBC World Service program on Kashmir, which does something that we didn't do. It interviews Kashmiris about Kashmir and talks to Kashmiris about Kashmir. And it's fascinating to me that one of the things that, nobody talks about what it is that Kashmiris themselves want. And it actually gives a very fascinating insight. Aparna, I'm going to end with my final question that I've asked everybody on this series so far, and that is, could you please tell me, where is your favorite bar in the world? I'm going to assume you have one. And what makes it so wonderful?
So I will be frank, I'm not much of a drinker. So I don't really have a favorite bar. But if I could answer it as one of my favorite restaurants, then I would advise that anybody who goes to Delhi the next time they go to India should go to this restaurant called Dum Pukht, which is inside, which is in the heart of Delhi, and it has the best North Indian cuisine I've ever eaten.
Say the name again.
DUMPUKHD. I can email it to you,
Please do. Okay.
and so that you can then share it with your colleagues.
I will share that with everyone. That's great. Well, thank you for the recommendation. Thank you for spending an hour with us. I appreciate it. This has been fascinating. I've got to say I'm not sure whether I should be more or less concerned now. But yeah, I'm concerned. The concern remains. But this has been fascinating, and for me, it's also very useful because you think if you read the newspapers, you know a lot about a situation when, of course, what you know is just the very top surface of what's going on, and it's so much more complicated than we think. I love all the people on Twitter, on X, who become instant experts on every issue in the world and know how to solve everything without knowing anything about it. And that's why people should join the World Affairs Council of Atlanta and the other World Affairs Councils around the nation to find out more about the world. Our next program is going to be on June 4th, and it's going to be on the South Korean elections, which are June 3rd. There's special presidential elections. The president of South Korea was impeached, and under their constitution, they actually, rather than having the vice president finish the president's term, they have elections to elect a new president. And on June 4th, we'll meet with Dr. Sidney Seiler from CSIS, the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington. He's one of our country's foremost experts on North and South Korea. I hope to see you then. Dr. Parna Pandey, thank you again so much for giving us an hour of your time. And I want to thank Dan Aboga, who is the producer of this program, for having put it together. I appreciate that. And Ricky Bevington, the president of World Affairs Council, for asking me to do this series. This has been great fun. Thank you so much. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador. Great to be here.
Good. Bye-bye.